Said start before we start. Oh, here's the chairman himself.
Evening all.
Evening all.
Evening.
Hello Andy, glad to have you aboard.
Thanks.
Hey, Chris.
Where are you from, Andy? East Suffolk, not far from Lowestoft. Oh, okay. About 80 or 90 miles from where you are somewhere. So you're somewhere near Bishop Stortford, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I had a quick look on the map because I didn't recognise the postcode, and then I had a look and I thought, there you are. So it's good coming to your club this way because it's unlikely I'd have come any other way. It's just too far to travel.
Yeah.
It's going to take me an hour and a half, 2 hours to get there, and then the same coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long old drive.
But you aren't the furthest I've done on one of these Zoom meetings. I joined a club in Yorkshire a couple of weeks ago, which is a long way from here. Utterly impossible to go in a day.
Yeah. You have to quarantine when you get back as well.
Yeah. I've got a booking from Aberdeen for next year via Zoom, or if we're meeting in real time, then we'd have to arrange for you to come up here. Aberdeen? I don't think so.
It would be nice. I might be able to double it up with some work if I could organise it just right. I work part time for the Open University, and occasionally I go to Milton Keynes. It's only up the road a little way from you.
Yeah.
Milton Keynes is not Aberdeen.
No.
No, definitely not. Right.
Evening, Morris. Evening, Maria. Hi.
Evening all.
Hi. Evening,
Hello,
Sam.
Stan. Hello, John. Hello, Yvonne.
Hello.
Right.
Evening.
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 I really enjoyed your lecture last week, so I thought I'd join you this week and see what's going on.
Oh, well, you're welcome.
Just me last week.
I was with John last week, so we watched it together. It was really good.
It was
So
the textures one, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
Good.
Every day merges into one now.
I went out taking textures into Kent. We took all sorts of things, so yeah, it was nice.
Yeah, I've been slightly obsessed with my patio.
Have you?
Yeah, I have with my garage wall.
Yeah.
Oh, you're seeing
all
it in real life.
all the brushwork that are just dry brushes on the garage wall makes a brilliant pattern.
Isn't there somebody came to us once who her ARPS panel was made of, it was by a canal boat side, and where they painted the boats, where they did that with the brushes, she just spent like about 2 days just photographing it, and they were little like landscapes made out of dripping paint.
Yeah.
It was really, really impressive.
Yeah, I remember the little tiny landscapes. Yeah, that was quite amazing. That
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Evening, Alan.
Evening.
Oh, hello, Alan.
Hi, Alan.
Hi,
What's
Alan.
happening in Stansted and Saffron Walden?
Sorry?
Yeah, it's gone up, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Highest
Going up everywhere.
in Essex.
Oh.
Don't go out.
Paul.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
I've got Morris on the picture in a minute. It's better.
You want gallery view?
We're seeing about 2,500 cases a week at the moment.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
Was that nationally? Oh,
London.
London.
Crikey.
Yeah.
I didn't think London was as high as some places.
That's across the whole of London. So obviously we've got 13 million people to spread that across. When you do the calculations, it's like everything with statistics. You can start showing it.
Yeah. It would be better if they could show what areas of London are going up.
So it's predominantly northeast London,
Yeah.
Brent, so Hackney, Tower Hamlets, Brent, and a couple of bits of the south.
So is it Enfield? Because that's where I'm from.
It is sort of the next tier, so it's not top tier, but it's certainly the next one.
I thought it was, yeah. Oh well, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Hello, Paul. Hello, Graham.
Good evening.
Hiya.
How are we all?
Quiet and home. It is very quiet.
Hello, Danielle.
Hi.
All right.
Hey, Daniel.
Hey, Daniel.
Yes,
So, Andy, I think the other Andrew filled you in on most of it. So it's going to be first, second, third, some highly commended and some commendeds.
That's what I've cut it down to.
Yeah.
It was a hard job, I can tell you.
Oh, cool. Oh, so you've already judged them online. That's quite good, actually. Yeah. So,
When I went through them first, I ended up holding back for myself 22 of the 88 images.
that's all right.
That's right.
Wow.
All right.
Russ?
Yeah. I've whittled it down to less than that.
Game. Makes everybody happy if they get highly commended. Well, it could be like the league competition at the moment. Everybody got such high scores in the first round. There's nothing to separate anybody.
Which then means that come to the last round, you have to get somebody to be really harsh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's it. That's what happens is you get one judge who's all 16, 17, 18s, and the next judge comes in, he's judging from 10 upwards, you know.
Yeah.
Do we still allow you to drop? Do we still drop the lowest score, Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. That helps a bit. Could do it the other way. We could drop the highest score. That'd be.
Yeah, we could.
Can you imagine the rouse? Hi, Paul. Hi, Paul. Hi, Dave. Hi, Neil.
Hello, everybody.
Where it is, they take the top mark and the bottom mark off.
Yeah, let's see, average it out. I thought you had something horrible growing out of your head, Neil.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a mix.
What's happened to his hair?
Did I mention it?
Oh, yes. Fortunate.
That's his halo.
Yeah, that's it, clearly.
It's a golden halo.
Yeah.
How is everyone?
Very right.
Oh, yeah. How's Malcolm now? He's older.
And don't mention it. Yeah, don't look a day over 21.
No.
Oh.
Are we doing this in hex?
Yeah.
Oh,
Same as last week.
Yeah.
I think they're doing my aging groats now. Yep.
Groats or goats, one of the two.
Yeah.
Hi, Heather.
Heather.
Hello. Hi, Heather.
Hello,
everybody.
Is that Gordon's ear I see?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm just setting it up because we're all behind. I'm gonna go and get the other glasses so I can see.
So we had a peaceful time with the twins again.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't tried to kill him this week.
Is that progress? Or resignation, do you reckon?
Acceptance.
No.
You may be glad to hear that I'm now a proud owner of a copy of Affinity.
Oh, well done.
Hey. Well,
Based on your
good luck with
suggestion,
that.
I emailed them and they gave me a discounted code. So
Cool.
Well, good luck with learning curve with Affinity.
yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Have you used Photoshop before or not?
Only very limited amount. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you haven't got anything to relearn, so I suppose it's a good place to start.
Yeah, exactly, and that's yeah.
Yeah,
We'll see. I'll also have a go at Photoshop and see how I go on with that. See what the differences are. But I'll let you know.
they're very similar, Dave. They're very similar. Yeah. Different language, but very similar.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It'll take good.
To be honest, the more of them you use, the more they also you think, oh well, there's curves there, there's that there, and then it's the odd extra feature, really.
That's right.
It's got a crop tool, so that's fine.
I'm not going to put myself up as an expert, Dave, but if you have any questions, just text me or phone me.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. That's much appreciated.
It's got the delete key that works across all platforms.
Absolutely. Evening, Warren.
Evening.
Warren. Hello, John.
JT.
Hi, John. Hi, Stan.
How's the film, whatever it is, this week going?
The virtual film festival, for those that don't know what we're talking about. London Film Festival starts for me at 9:30 this evening.
Oh,
yes.
We've only got you for half an evening, have we?
You've only got me for half an evening, and then it goes on for the next 10 days. So luckily, a lot of the movies have got a 72-hour license on them, which is obviously the first time it's ever happened, because normally you're sitting in a cinema. But there's about 12 movies they're showing actually in the cinema. I'm going to see 2 of them. So they've removed seating from the BFI, the South Bank. That's the weekend after next. So yeah, it should be very different sitting watching a film festival in your own front room with some popcorn.
The same, is it?
It won't be. No. Sorry, was that who said that?
Me.
Sorry, Chris. Yes, hi, mate. No, it's very different, because the real thing of a film fest, and I've been doing it for 20 odd years, is a bit of glam, the celebrities, the interviews, the press are there. Several of the events are normally red carpet events, so they're world premieres. So no, it's very, very different, Chris. It's in between. I suppose the difference would be sitting watching a movie in a drive-in in your own car, or going to a lovely cinema to see a movie. I mean, it's a very different experience. But this is the Venice Film Festival was a few weeks ago, and because Italy's doing so well with the virus, they actually held it in the real. There was actually people in cinemas and everything else. But London can't obviously. Well, I suppose they could have done it, but they must have assumed. I mean, the tickets are much, much cheaper, of course, and of course they can't limit. I mean, in theory, you could play it through this into the club. They can't limit how many people are actually watching these movies. As long as you've got the ticket, anyone could watch it. Hi, Graham.
Hi, Graham.
How are you?
Good evening.
Long time no see.
Daniel, hello.
Hello, Danielle.
Hi.
Hi, Danielle. She's just hidden.
Oh, she is. Yeah.
She is.
Yeah.
Gallery. Ah, there's everybody.
She's got
There's everybody. That's a good attendance, isn't it?
Brilliant.
Hi, Neil. You haven't been around for a long time.
No.
How are you?
Answers that one.
Life has been mad, but it usually is, isn't it?
You're okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Is Leslie still on holiday?
Yeah, I think so. I remember she saw her on Tuesday. I can't remember what she said.
Yeah, she was at the committee meeting, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Hi, David. It's funny because when you're on this screen with everybody on it, you look across to see someone, you look left and right, and of course on their screen you may be in a completely different position.
I get over an urge to point at somebody like that. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
I'm pointing at David, who's next to me up on the top left.
Yeah.
But he doesn't know that. Where am I on your screen, David?
Who, me?
Yes.
You're bottom right.
Yeah.
Weird the way it's jumping.
We've had the software weighted, so Warren's always at the bottom.
Yeah, no, in my screen, I'm right at the top near the middle.
Right.
Well,
we best crack on. It's nine,
Chris, just before you start, can I just thank everybody for the birthday present and the birthday wishes? But thank you very much, everyone.
You're very welcome.
You're very
Whatever you do, I don't want to hear happy birthday again. I've had too many happy birthday Zooms.
Well, you're not going to make it to the next one, then.
Right. There's only one way you can stop happy birthday for next year, Malcolm.
Well, better allow screen sharing as well.
Yeah.
So tonight is our Tony Perryman Monochrome print competition. Though obviously in the COVID world, we don't have prints, so it's going to be DPI. Unfortunately, the judge Andrew had booked months and months and months and months in advance, backed out at the last minute due to family issues.
And then the judge that we found to replace him backed out. So then we tried judge number 3, which is Andy Wilson. Hi.
Hello.
Many thanks for dropping in at such short notice. It really is appreciated.
Well, in these times, I'm sitting at home doing not a lot so often.
So yeah, we have Andy Wilson FRPS. That's right, isn't it? To judge for us. He's already looked through the pictures on Dropbox, so he's seen the actual original quality. So if your picture don't look so good on Zoom, don't worry. He's actually judged them against the real image. So over to Jeff to work the magic.
Yeah, right. Can you see that?
Nope, can't see it.
Yeah.
What about that?
Yes.
Can see that.
There we go.
Right, hang on a second. Let's get the program up. Right.
Okay, well, good evening and welcome, and thank you for inviting me. It's I've not been to your club before, as I was saying much earlier on. I probably wouldn't be able to come if these were face-to-face meetings, because it's about 80-90 miles each way for me, which is a bit far to go in an evening and back, but it's great to come here. And I say, I have seen all your images, all the monochrome images, all 88 of them, probably in slightly better quality than you're going to see them via Zoom in my experience, but maybe not. But final judging is always based on what I actually see here and comments, but I have actually shortlisted for myself. I think there's a number of images which I'm going to hold back. It was a tough old task. I did it earlier today. I looked through them and I initially thought I was going to whittle it down on my second skim through, and I managed to get about 22, which was about 1 in 4 that I was saying that's good enough to be whittled down. So then I had to get pernickety to whittle it down even further, because I'm sure you didn't want 9 or 10 highly recommended, highly commended, and another 9 or 10 commended. Anyway, you haven't heard me judge. You'll get the drift of how I do things. I find it interesting you've got a whole competition on just monochrome. That's not, in my experience, common. Usually there is a monochrome section mixed in with other things, either monochrome print, well, usually monochrome prints. But nevertheless, that's what we've got. So anytime you're ready to progress, we'll just move on through. Right, they're coming up in a different order to what I saw them, so I'm going to have to be very careful to make sure I remember the ones I want to hold back and don't talk myself into something different. Right, okay. First shot here. I missed the title there. I've forgotten what the title was.
The Hunter.
Okay. What strikes you straight away about this image is, in fact, that the owl is dominant in the picture. There's nothing else really to distract us. And we've got a little bit of motion blur on both of the wings, which is good. That shows the bird really is in flight. And of course, it's sharp around the face and the eye, which is where you really need it to be sharp. That's all good. I always have a slight doubt and hesitancy about why you do natural history, flora and fauna, in monochrome. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think there are one or two others here where the monochrome actually is probably the better choice than leave it in color. I wonder with this one, I sometimes think this one may well have been better in color. Obviously, I've not seen the color version, so I can't be sure. Another thing that struck me on this one is that the eye is just a black hole. Now, I'm not a natural history photographer, and I know these things are more difficult than it might appear to be, but a little bit of sparkling in the eye is kind of like quite important on any form of picture of an animal or a person. But yeah, I think overall it worked. You know, you've got a well-cropped image, you've got a well-positioned bird, you've got space for it to fly in the front, so all the good elements are there. But if we can now move on. Silhouettes and shadows, yeah. I like the idea of this one. You've done well to catch it. It's backlit. That's how you know, because the shadows are coming towards us, and that's why everything's in silhouette. And I think you've captured that well. We've got some very bright areas on the what look like wet paving slabs of some sort. It looks like it might be a railway crossing of some sort. It looks like it could be railway lines going across, something like that. The grid pattern, not quite sure, but you know, the fact that that surface is very bright and probably wet actually works quite well. For me, I found it a little bit too busy. We've got, well, 1.5, 1 3/4 cycles in there, 3 full wheels, at least 2 feet, if not more, that are visible in the picture. And I'm not quite sure where to focus. Nothing really leads me into say focus in. If anything does lead me into say focus here, it's on that reflection of the shadow, I should say, of the wheel that's slightly left of center. But I'm not held there. I drift around without really thinking, where am I going to focus? I think with a shot like this, you need less would be more. The background is quite distracting, the railings and the grass and all the rest of it. What really is good is that bit on the floor and the wheels, and maybe you should zoom in on those and cut out a lot of the other stuff. But I think you've done well, because technically I think it's just quite difficult. So I think that is a good job, that how you've captured it. Okay, shall we move on? Eyes Wide Shut. Yeah, the title here, you know, I like the title here. I think it works well. Essentially, this is a photograph, I assume, of somebody else's artwork. It looks like it's probably a painting on a wall or something like that. I like the post-production treatment. The fact that it's ended up looking like a sort of almost like a pen and ink drawing, but clearly is a photograph, that works well as well. But overall, I mean, I've got a clear focal point, the face. That's what I look at. But when you go around the edges, there's a lot there, and it gets, you know, it's just very, very busy. And I wonder, it looks as though it's probably some sort of composite, and I think you probably put in too much. If you're going to put in a lot, I would suggest that maybe some of the other stuffs are dulled down so that the face stands out clearly. But I like the idea. I mean, I clearly someone who's got a lot of skill, but it's not, it doesn't really, I don't find this really aesthetically satisfying enough to want to actually hold it back. But I can see that there is skill and abilities in here, particularly post-production skills and abilities. So we'll move on from that one. Yeah, I like this one. It's very atmospheric. And seeing it now in a slightly lower light, I can appreciate how you've actually got quite a lot of detail right the way across this, particularly in what would be the darker areas. The boat in the foreground stands out well. We've got a few stars in the sky. They, you know, so, and it's a long exposure, as you'd expect in low light, and we can see the motion in the sky and the clouds, but not so long that the stars have moved. The stars are just points of light. One of the weaknesses I found of this one is there are halos down the cliff edges, almost all the way down, but particularly on the lower bit of the cliff on the left, and nearly all the way down the cliff on the right. Things which are very easy to get rid of. I found the moon, I assume, it's blown out there. And I know it would be in reality, but post-production, I think maybe you should dull that down. Most of the reflection in the sea is not blown out, but again, it could be dulled down so a little bit more texture comes through. And I think there is a little bit of an area there which is probably blown out as well, which is a pity because it's a really good, moody, atmospheric shot. And I like the way you've actually managed to capture that boat in the foreground. And it's not dazzling, but it's a key point. So, a well done image, but again, we'll move on. Gloucester Docks. I should know Gloucester Docks. I used to go there quite a lot, but I don't remember this particular scene. So, but never mind. It's clearly some old warehouses or something of that nature on the dock front. There is what looks like a mobile crane there, a vintage mobile crane, I would say. It looks like it may well still be working, but possibly not, too far away to tell. The composition is right. The way the paving stones lead you into the picture. When you get to that crane, you stop on that because it's something of interest to look at. But then beyond that, there are a lot of other buildings which distract from it slightly. I wonder if that crane could have been made bigger to feature bigger in the picture. You only had to move a few steps closer, I think, or zoom in, whichever is easier. But clearly you've got space to move forwards. And then that detail on the lower right could be got out. Crane could become bigger. The other weakness I thought was it's quite bright. There's obviously lights in the top of the buildings down the left-hand side, or going across from the left, to going behind the crane, and they're all rather bright. Again, we need to dull down. We've lost all detail and texture there. And it is post-production work. You can probably capture this in one go, but post-production, using your raw file, you need to dull down some of these brighter areas. It probably needs selective picking to dull them down. I don't think you can probably do it all in one go. Varying techniques for doing that. But overall, I quite like the image. I think it works well in black and white. It's a good mono image. But again, not one of the ones I wish to hold back. So another one we'll move on. Gnat larvae. Yeah. It's a good natural history picture. And I think this is one where the monochrome is actually effective. I think that, it works in monochrome because of the nature of the play. What in this image is a pale grey. I don't know what colour. It might have been a pale blue or a green or something in the background before. So I think that works. I think it's satisfactorily sharp where it needs to be, i.e. on the two larvae. But the problem with the larvae is they're so far apart that we've got a huge space of nothingness in the middle. So it feels like an image in two parts there. Maybe just the larvae alone in the lower left and everything else cropped out would be a better image. You'd have to enlarge it. Maybe the resolution and the detail's not there if you did so. What I can only describe as the bright white areas at the top there, they may be some form of eggs or something where the larvae have hatched from. I'm not sure, but they don't really add anything to the picture for me. They're very, very bright. There is detail there, and that's what focuses my image. So in the image, that's what my eye focuses on, is those bright white things at the top, rather than what I'm told in the title is the subject, in which clearly you intended to be the subject, which is the gnat larvae themselves. It's something that you should work on more. I think you probably may need to go and do these again, but I think there's a good idea here, but it hasn't quite worked. What I would often describe as a work in progress. So if we move on. Asia. All right, well, it had an Asian feel to it when I saw it. That was the thing that I noticed. And I think the main subject is clearly this statue of this rather ferocious and awesome, well, mix of creatures there, whatever it might be. So some sort of great ape, I think, possibly is what's actually being depicted. That's what I focus on. But there's an awful lot of other stuff around it. All the washing lines and the walls and the gateway and the tiles and everything else around that. In fact, we have got a white line almost dead center, which I think is something to do with the washing lines, which seem to be a cut on the image. And I think if you cropped everything out to the left of that white line and just kept the stuff to the right of it, i.e. the statue, we'd have a better picture. But we've still got too much stuff in the way of it that gets in the way. What you have done well, you've got a really good range of tones and detail and texture on the statue and on the bits of carvings all around it. That you've done really, really very well. But the image, nevertheless, even though that's the focal and that's what I focus on and look at, everything else around it, particularly all the washing that's over the top of it, is very, very distracting. But I think you've got a good technique here, and I think the monochrome has been successful. It's the composition that doesn't quite work for me. So if you move on. Shadow play. My first impression of this image was I love it. I like it a lot. I think it's a great portrait. I think it's a way to do it. The pose of the subject, the way looking up, and the texture and detail on the skin are all good. But I find myself, as I keep going and looking at this, trying to look through all that shadowing on there. I think the shadowing is, it's the size of the grid of the shadows is so small that it actually distracts from the quality of the picture. I think if you had a grid work like that, but it was much larger, the squares were 4 or 5 times as large, so it only had a couple of lines across the face, or a couple of squares, 3 or 4 squares across it, that might be better. The eyes here are half in shadow and half not. There is texture and detail in the eye, and there is a slight glint in the eye. When you come down below the chin and the neckline there, it just merges and blurs into the background. Everywhere else, you've got good separation. But if you look at it, the way I'm looking at it, it looks like his neck's only half the size it should be. It looks like a great big chunk has been taken out of his underjaw and part of the neck, which is, not a successful element. So I think this is, a great idea. Another one which is a work in progress. And I think experimenting with something like this could well end up with a really good picture. So if we move on again. Life ring. Well, it certainly is a life ring, a lifeboat, and we've got full context there of, it looks like it's on a boat. We've got the seawater or water below that looks like it's the water motions, the all little bits of foam on there, just the sort of thing you see when you look overboard. There's a few wet patches in there as well, and the life ring itself and its reflection, they're the focal points. We've got nice diagonals leading over to it through the reflections up to the life ring itself. All that works well. The exposure's right. It's a little bit over bright maybe in some places, but again, not very much. But the real weakness I find is that, having said all that, technically you've handled everything well, but the picture isn't captivating enough. It doesn't engage me enough. I want to sit there and think of it long enough. I think this is one image of a set of something to do with the boat and the motions and the travel and so on. And that as a set of images, it might be much better as one of them and as a single image. Because I think the quality is here, in terms of the photography and the presentation and the composition and everything else. But it's not sufficiently captivating. So we'll move on again, please. Iris. Now this one I did like a lot. I've seen a lot of images like this in colour. In fact, I think I've only ever seen images of this style in colour. I don't recall seeing one in monochrome. And then I thought, well, hold on. Pictures like this are often drawn in pen and ink or pencil or charcoals, and they will therefore often be essentially monochrome. When I started thinking from that perspective, I thought, this is rather a clever image. Someone has taken their time to get this iris there. There's really good textures and details. It's all very soft and understated, but all the details and all the textures are there. It's one of those exceptional images where there are no real blacks in it and there are no real whites, excluding the border, at all. And it's a very limited tonal range. But for me, this has huge impact. The iris stands out. It jumps out at me. It's got punch and impact that I wouldn't expect if you were to describe the tonal ranges. So that's the first one I'm going to hold back. London Meadows. I puzzled over this one quite a bit. It's very, very dark. It's very, very grey. And again, it's like the previous one. There are no whites and there are no blacks. It is grey all over. I'm looking at it and it's the same here. I've looked at this on several different angles and there is red. I see red across the middle, around the trees, and moving off to the right-hand side of the picture. It seems all red in it. It's not monochrome. There are, there are colours in there. But excluding that, ignoring that for the moment, the image, again, it just doesn't do anything for me. I find it, I can't really see what's going on. There's a couple of trees, there's some fencing, which is probably barbed wire fencing, and the posts and the bit of grass in the foreground. It's presumably a marshy ground. This is caused by the mist, but I just don't think it's been successful. Maybe this would be much better in colour, where the colours would be all soft and muted, and there wouldn't be much colour there, almost desaturated, but that would make it jump to life, I think. I don't think this is really a suitable subject for monochrome, not the way it's been taken and the way it's being presented. Maybe I'm just not really understanding the technique and what you're doing, but it just doesn't work for me, I'm afraid. So move on. Yeah, this one I quite liked. I think it's a good idea. You have told me it's a picture of the footpath, and that's clearly what I see. I focus on the footpath, I follow down the footpath, and right there at the far end, you haven't spotted, there is a little character. They're so small in the picture, I can't say if they're walking away or walking to me. They are in the brightest patch in the centre, so I am attracted there, and it doesn't take very long for you to see this image. But I did find that some of the other background was quite bright, and I did think where I really focus is not on the subject of the little person in the background. I focus on the pathway a little bit in front of that, where it's a little bit darker, where there's really good detail and texture and tones of, a whole range of tones across there. That's where I focus, and it's not sufficiently interesting to hold my attention. The little character at the bottom is important and it works, but I think they need to be a lot nearer, a little bit larger in the picture for it to work. And I do find that the white areas around there, some of those on the trees in particular, are lacking in texture and detail, and we need that. I think it's been well framed, particularly on the right side. I think that's good framing using the trees to set up an edge. The left less so, because you've got that white gap between those two trees right on the left-hand side where it goes out. And I think that you may need to have cropped that in a slightly higher. In fact, you may have been able to crop the bottom off, and where that root goes across the pathway, crop up to that, and then crop in a bit from the right-hand side, the left-hand side as well. So if you crop up from the bottom left-hand corner and move it in and upwards, I think you may have a much better image. That would also have the effect of making the person in the background well. It worked really well for me. It had punch for me, and it had impact for me. It was one I did seriously consider for a while as holding back. It made it well beyond the first 22 that I clicked off, but it didn't make the final ones, I'm afraid. So we need to move on. How things used to be. Yeah, well, I'm sure they did used to be a bit like this. The lady doing her washing in the old style mangle and everything else. I quite like, and that's what I focus on, is the lady in the doorway with her bowl and the mangle on the far right. That's what I focus on. And I see a second image on the left, which is the stairways leading up, and I follow up there and I go up there and then I go out of the picture. And it takes a bit of an effort to come back into it. Yeah. I like the subtle sepia effect of this, rather than going for a black and white, but going for this, sepia. And I think it's about right. The vignetting, the slight paling around the edges, that also works as a successful image. But I do find the big one is it's an image in two halves. We have got there what looks to me like some quite modern cabling or trunking just to the right of the railings coming down the wall at the back. And the drain pipes look Oh no, they look satisfactorily old, but the electric cables there are a bit of a giveaway that it's not as old as it might otherwise appear. Good idea, well presented in many ways, but something that needs a slightly different approach in the original cropping, I think, would be the main thing. So again, this is another one that certainly made the original shortlist, but not the final shortlist. Right. So moving on. Emporio. Okay, yeah. Very, very high contrast image. The bright colours of the building, the church, and the all but blacks of the sky. It's not quite black. On my screen, I can definitely see the edges of the picture where the sky is so black. It's a little bit, you know, off black, slightly grayer. There is texture and detail across all the white areas. I think just a little bit of dulling down on those white areas, overall brightness, just bring it down slightly, you get far more texture. If you look on the right hand side, that's the sort of texture I'm wanting to see across everywhere, and down the bottom right hand corner and across that triangular piece in the center bottom. That's the sort of texture I'd like to see a lot more of. I'm sure they're all like it. I don't see why two walls would be like it and the rest would be very smooth. So I think that's and generally speaking, I find if you've got pictures like this looking up at buildings, a very dark, all but black, featureless sky is not necessarily the best way to go. A few whispery clouds in there, I think, would really add something to it. I know in colour, that was probably some sort of dark blue, but in mono, it's now gone featureless, and it now makes the thing seem isolated. It seems like a cutout rather than a real image. So I think there's potential for success here, and I like the perspective. I like the way you've got this looking up, and the way you've held it in. Converging verticals, they're fine for an image like this. In fact, without the converging verticals, it look odd. Okay, shall we move on again? Still laughing. Well, at least one of them are laughing, and the other one looks slightly bemused that she is laughing. I wonder what you're laughing at, lady. I don't know if these are a couple or not. They look as though they possibly are, but they could just be two good friends out for a walk, presumably on the beach or seafront, I should say, long past all these what presumably are beach huts or close to the beach there. It's been well handled. There's a good tonal range across there. There are some blacks, there are some near whites, and there's many tones in between. The sky is light, not much feature, but that's fine. It works well against it. But the subject matter, I don't think, is really a competition subject matter. It's a great one for the family album. It's a great record shot of those two along out for a walk. That's as far as it goes. I think it might be better if we had a bit more space in the left and lower foreground for them to walk into and a bit less behind them. I think you got it the wrong way round. You need a bit more enough. If you haven't got the foreground, pity. I don't know what you can do about it, but if you have got a bit more foreground, I think you should have left it in. But yeah, the tones on the face, the quality of that capture of the image, that's done really very well. So there is success here. It's just that it's not, well, as I said. Anyway, so shall we move on? Yeah, this is to me, this is just a simple record shot of this harbour scene. We've got typical buildings and things, what you expect to see around the harbour, and we've got reflections of things in the water. That all works well. The centre, again, is very, very bright, too bright. We're, particularly on those two towers, we're just losing all detail. There's not much detail in the reflection, but that may be just how it is, because even where it's duller in that reflection in the center there's not a lot of detail. There's more detail in the actual building itself, but there is bright areas there on the building itself, all that white building, where I think there should be some more detail, and again, that needs dulling down. The sky is good. I like the sky. That's sufficiently interesting to give a background. It's not attractive, it's not what you look at, but it fills in the background nicely. It offsets the foreground of the image. It does look to me as though the horizon's not level. The whole thing feels to be sloping down towards the left, slightly off, even though the center bit looks upright, but the building on the left looks so it's leaning out of the picture. which is a bit uncomfortable to me. We need that one in particular to be a bit more upright. It's a pleasant image, and it does seem to me that we're losing a number of the tonal shades in there. That in the water, for example, we can see bits of area which are fairly textureless, fairly featureless. It has a feel that it's being posterized, and I don't quite know why when you're going monochrome. Anyway, pleasant image, but definitely not one of my holdbacks for this evening. I like this image. You don't know me, but I am a mathematician. Well, I'm a statistician now by trade, but I was a mathematician, and I love geometrics, and I love pattern, and I love texture, and I love symmetries of all sorts. And this one has got all those things going for it. And the sharpness and the detail there is lovely. What I found slightly uncomfortable is the fact that the center of the plant is almost center. And for me, to make it more interesting, I want to say a little bit cropped off from the right this time. Bring in the right. You can see where it changes to slightly brighter sections, crop off the darks at the bottom and the right, and bring those in, so those are much nearer the corner. That will offset the thing into more like the lower third, and I think that would have far more impact. Dropping off to the dark at the top would work fine. Okay, and I think that would focus it that much better. But I think this is a really well done image. I think you've done it really well. And I had to nitpick to decide why I wasn't going to do it. And it's that just that crop was the only thing that I could really find as to why I wasn't going to shortlist it. So well done on that one. Woolly Lots Cottage. A feature of so many images around East Anglia, in fact probably in camera clubs further afield, because it's such a well-known place. This one I like because it is different from so many other images that I have seen, and the difference I think is all to do with the post-production. Not so much it's in monochrome, but that's part of it, but it's to do with the way the post-production has been done. It almost feels like a really skillful pen and ink drawing. That would be very skillful. But then, having been really satisfied with it and really pleased with it, there were one or two things about it which I started looking at, maybe a bit more on, the bullocks and cart in there, they're an addition. I think they're probably a post-production edition because they don't go the right way across there. I've been there, and I don't think they're going the right way, because I think they're probably in a bit of water, a little bit too deep for them. And if you look at the wheel on the cart, the reflection seems very odd. It seems a bizarre angle in a way that the reflections of the bullocks themselves are not. They work quite well. It's the cart bit that attracts, and then it looks around the edge of the cart, and where it looks like you've cut out bits of the tree to reveal it, and it looks cut out to me. And I didn't like the sky very much. The effects you've done I can see you've done post-production effects on the sky, much like you've done post-production effects all over it. Elsewhere, it works. In the sky, it doesn't. It does feel a little bit too daubed paint to me, rather than anything else. But yeah, it is a pleasing image. Overall, it's satisfying. It's only when you start looking at details that it doesn't. And again, that was nitpicking to weed it out of my rather long shortlist and get down to my really fine shortlist. So we can move on. A very strange title. I've no idea what the title is. It just looks like the file name as it came out of the camera, with no title actually being added to it. So I don't know what the title is. I don't know where I recognize it. It looks familiar, but not quite sure where it is. I find the image a pleasing image. We've got that very powerful leading line in, which curves around and sweeps the eye into the main subject, which is that building. And we've got that little dark, what I assume is a seat there, which is also just at the right angle to force your eye line onto the main subject of the building, which is then beautifully reflected in the water. There's lovely textures there in that water. There's good detail across the building. Slightly slow, long exposure, because the sky does seem to have a little bit of motion in it there, a little bit of blurring caused by the length of the exposure. Not so obvious in the water, but probably still there. I think it works, but having said all that, I just think it is a clever, effective record shot of this building. I wonder if we needed something else in there, maybe a couple of people walking along coming in there, just something else, on the causeway, maybe someone sitting on that seat looking into the picture somehow. Something extra might have been better for it. But yeah, I think clearly you've got good technical skills, clearly you've got a good eye for composition, and that has all worked successfully. So maybe you can move on. There's a really powerful section in this picture right the way, it's a bit above center, across the center there, where we've got water, a little bit of reflection, that curved line with the bird sitting in that reflection, the little house in the background, and the different tones of the trees in the background. They all work rather well, but there is an awful lot of nothingness in the foreground. If you look where that bird is reflected in the water and where it ends, from there downwards, if you take a horizontal line across there downwards, there is very little. I'd be tempted to crop off 3/4 of that area below, and probably half the sky at the top, to give a letterbox format. And then it would be quite a pleasant image. It is, generally speaking, a bit grey and grey in the areas of interest. It's quite bright and white in some of the waters, and there's a couple of black spots. Unfortunately, I think we're missing separation between some of the posts. There may be at least 1 or 2 more birds sitting on top of those posts, which you really have to look hard to find them. And I think, like the one on the curved post, they should stand out, but they don't here. So I think, again, this is something that is probably better in your mind's eye than it is in the image you've put before us. And that's always a problem. If you were there at the time and you remember what it was like at the time, you've got that which you'll see in the image, which I wasn't there, I didn't see it. I've only got the image in front of me, which needs to conjure all that up for me. And I don't think it quite has. So we'll move on from that one, please. I think this is an example of a monochrome image of an animal which is incredibly successful. It's a portrait, and it's a portrait which is probably enhanced by the fact that it's in monochrome. Look at those textures and details. Look at the fineness in detail in the hair, across the face, in the eyes, around the mouth, everywhere. And it dulls and drops out lovely in the background. No details to distract. The face, the head, the mane fills the picture. If I have to criticize it at all, I would say that the eyes are just a little bit dull. They're not got quite the sparkle that I might like to see. But I do. And see what this reminds me of, for those who are of a certain age, you may well remember one of the very early Santana albums, which had a picture of a lion on the front. Not like this, but different, but it's reminiscent of that, because that was also a monochrome image. Theirs had lots of other arty effects in it, which are not here. I like this image. I think this is great. I think this is a highly successful image. Another one I definitely need to hold back. Bit of a tangle. And this was the very first image I saw when they came up on my screen with the set as they arrived. And that was the one which came up first. I thought, oh, abstract image. Maybe there's going to get a lot of abstract work here. I like abstract. It generally works. In this case, it is abstract. And there are some good elements to it, the way we've got the lines and the textures in places, but not others. And there's variable focus. Look where the line that comes across the center towards the right, where it's in the darker. So we've got superb detail and lighting there. But as you move across that, it goes black. And then if you move further across it to the left-hand side of the picture, it just goes totally out of focus and featureless. Whereas behind it, we've got some nice texturing and detail. I think if we're going to do something like this as an abstract, everything needs to be sharp, or everything needs to be slightly out of focus. And I think the shading on this hasn't quite worked. It's a mix between sharp and real life.
So my PC is jumping around.
Okay. Yeah, well, I've said most of the main things I want to say about this one. Um, I think there's a good idea here, but I think it needs maybe a rethink, and maybe photographing in less harsh light. So we haven't got these really strong contrasts between the all but black areas and the very, very bright areas. There are good parts and there are bad parts to it. It didn't make my shortlist in the end. The look. Yep. And I didn't need the title to see that the gentleman sitting in the carriage looking out at the photographer is what makes the image. And I think you got it just right. The guy in the carriage is looking down at the guy with his photograph, and that look and that expression on his face, you know, is success. That works for me. But I do find we've got rather a lot around the image. You know, there's a lot of excess there. I might well have cropped this in and just got the guy in the window frame of the carriage, and cropped off the photographer's elbow would become to the bottom of the picture. And the right-hand side would have gone up somewhere just to the right of the door. And that would be the image. So we need to crop, you know, a lot off it. And then I think it'd be, you know, a better image, an image with greater impact. The main message would still be there. I think this works successfully in black and white. You've got a good tonal range across there. You've got all but pure blacks, and you've got right the way across to very bright areas with good detail and texturing throughout. Nowhere have you lost it. So that is successful. Okay, but it unfortunately didn't make the shortlist, so we can move on again. Yeah, this is one I looked at a lot. Because I'm really drawn into the sort of the mystical, magical feel of the misty morning over these, well, presumably these marsh grasses and the trees which are silhouetted against the brighter background. I like that effect. It's done well there. And there is some sort of texturing right the way across the backgrounds. And the vignetting around the edges works very well. It holds your focus into the center. But I did think in the end overall that maybe there is too much background sky and too much edges. I think you might need to focus it in. And I did find the contrast between the bright areas in the center and the dark areas by the vignetting too much. I think if you're going to do vignetting, it needs to be subtle and not in your face. Oh, it's been vignetted like that down the bottom. It doesn't look like it was really that bright in the center and really that dull around the edges. It looks like, you know, it has been done post-production. And I think it just overdone it a bit. Subtler might have worked much better. And it, you know, is very, very, very bright on the, you know, behind that tree. We've just lost detail of the tree. Look at the top of the tree, the fine details we've got there. Look where the bright white area is. We've lost detail. Some of those branches and leaves are not joined up anymore, which is a pity.
It's the sun.
It did make my original shortlist, but then it got whittled out, I'm afraid. Silver birches. I was fascinated by this image when I first saw it, because I wasn't looking at titles. I look at images first because I want the image to speak to me. And this image did speak to me. It felt very abstract. I liked the idea of it. I didn't actually know what the scale on this was at all. After a bit of looking, I did decide that they were trees. And so therefore the scale was quite big, and the title kind of like confirmed that for me, that actually this image is over quite a large area, and we've got some very big trees here, presumably in winter because there appear to be no leaves on any of them, and they do stand out from the backgrounds. So in that sense you've done well. You've got a good range of tones here. I found the weakness of this, though, was I found nowhere really to settle my eye on and focus. There is too much of it altogether. At one point, I focus on that tree in the top left-hand corner because it's a little bit brighter. At another point, I focus on that tree, which is roughly on the upper left third. At another point, I'm focusing down the right-hand side. But I don't actually settle anywhere. I keep moving around. And sometimes then I just focus right in the middle, lower center, where it's a bit empty, and then I think, but there's nothing here. So I'm afraid, I think you've done a great image. You've got great control. You've got great monochrome image, a great production, but I don't think the image actually holds long enough. I like these subtle pictures, these soft toned pictures, and I think you've done well here. You know, the picture without those two people there would be quite a different image. And I think with those two people there, it works quite well. We've got, you know, very subtle shades of greys going all the way across the picture. With just those two figures, really very, very dark. They're the only things which come to near black. And that, I assume, is the sun in the sky. I don't know why it's there. It adds nothing to the image as far as I'm concerned. It looks like you had a lovely photograph and someone cut a hole in it. If that was mine, I'd either crop the top off and lose it, or I'd clone it out, one of the two. I don't think it adds anything. I think the picture is much more powerful without it. Okay. Yeah, the composition is good. Other than that point I just made, it works very well from that point of view. But in the end, I had to nitpick to find reasons to drop it out, and that the sun reason was the one I did drop out. Will London's architecture survive? I don't know if it will survive or not. When I first saw this, the first thing that came to mind was Escher. Why? Because it's graphic in nature, and there's very fine details, lots and lots of details in there. And I'm sure if you went round there, you could name any number of the buildings which are there, because they are iconic, recognizable buildings of all sorts. Clearly a composite, because these buildings don't exist overlapping in this way at all in reality. The sky is the closest to reality, but any individual element is still reality. So I think that's very, very clever the way that's being put together. You've got good tonal ranges right across there. The focal point is clearly the bit which is St. Paul's and the bit which sticks up in the middle there. That all works really very well. I did find it the sky was a little bit on the noisy side, but then I thought, but then that's the nature of the image. That probably actually is working in its favor rather than against it. But overall, I found it was just a little bit too busy, a little bit too overdone. But I think it's a great image, nevertheless. And you know, your post-production skills are excellent. But we need to move on. End of the walk. I like simple pictures, and this is a simple picture. There's really not much in it apart from the two shoes or the two walking boots, which stand out clearly. You know, we've got great texturing on the wall and everything in the background. We've got lovely lighting on the shoes themselves. We got, you know, the lighting shapes and molds the shoes and gives it texture and detail. The shoes do look wet and dirty, so they have been used for walking. All that works very well. The downside for me is they look like they have been really very carefully posed and set up there, and the laces have been very carefully laid out. It looks too staged and not natural. If I take my shoes off, and I am generally speaking quite a tidy and organized person, I don't think mine would end up like that, particularly if I've just, you know, it's the end of the walk and I'm tired. Even if it's only a sort of 3 or 4 mile walk and I'm tired, I don't think they'd end up like that. And there's not a chance if I'd been on a day's walk and done 15 miles over whatever terrain it might be. And that is the weakness of this one, I think. Everything else about it is fabulous. If it was mine, I might just crop a little bit more off from the top right. Just crop it off, keep the aspect ratio until you have lost those little bits of, you know, the door frame stuff there. So bring it down just a little way. I still want to see the bottom of the door, but I don't want to see those details in the top right there. Just bring it in to get rid of those. And then I think it might be and maybe less staged image would work better. Again, it was one I definitely thought about shortlisting, but in the end I couldn't, because I thought I got some better ones that, you know, were actually better than this one. But it is a great image. Night walk. Yeah, it does feel like a night walk. It does feel like you're walking at night time because of the way all the lighting is there on the path. We've got powerful leading lines that lead me into the picture. I have no doubt we got this couple there walking along, walking away, and walking into the picture is a good idea. But again, like the one we had with the trees and the footpath, I think they're still a little bit too far away. They were a bit nearer. So, you know, you can see two bright areas of light. If we put them in what as we come from the bottom, for the second bright area of light, they would be better. They'd be a little bit bigger in the frame. I like the fact it's a slightly long exposure image and the fact that, you know, they are slightly blurred in their motion. That works well for a nighttime scene. I do find there's an awful lot of wasted space in the foreground. I think you could crop off so that the light which is on the right in the foreground, crop it off and make the second light back on the edge. But you need a little bit of tree there, so that stonework in the top right, keep that in and crop off to get that, you know, get the lower light out on the right there, and that will move the bottom up as well. In fact, you may even need to crop it up so that dark area, you know, past the first light area, that dark area there is actually the bottom of the picture. That would automatically make the people bigger in the picture, and that would automatically make it a little bit more successful. But overall, I think you've done well in this, you know, in this nighttime scene for what you have captured. You've captured it well. We'll move on.
Oh, come on.
Derwent Water. Well, having had a walking picture a couple ago, I have to confess I am a great walker. I love walking around hills, and I love walking in the Lake District, the Peak District, the Yorkshire Dales and Scotland when I can get that far. I haven't done any of it for a year because we haven't been able to get away to get up there. But I've walked around Derwent Water lots of times, taken lots of pictures of Derwent Water, climbed up all the mountains around there. This one immediately resonated with me. I think you've done a great image here. It's got mood, it's got atmosphere. And I like the fact you've got these three rocks in the foreground. You can see through the water to some of the stones on the bottom. And then we've got it leading back to that, what looks like a little island in the back center there. All that works rather well. But I did find that the rocks in the foreground dominate, or the background dominates, and there's a separation between them with not much in there. We have got the quite strong leading line of the clouds in the sky and reflected in the water, leading us across in from the left-hand side, but it doesn't work on the right-hand side in quite the same way because they're much duller. And in some ways, I think, I wonder if you just did the three stones in the foreground and cut everything else out, it would be a much more powerful image. Or if we had a little bit more texture and detail and contrast in the background, that would also work. When I say contrast in the back, I mean contrast along the shoreline in the trees and the mountains and so on. That might work. I think you've got a great shot. I think you've got a great composition, but I don't think it has quite worked in this case. If we move on. Yeah. This is much like one we had before, where we had that church building which was very bright against a very dark sky, and most of the comments I said there apply here. Black sky, I don't think it's too dark enough. We need a little bit, we can still see the separation around the edge, but I think a few fluffy clouds in there somewhere, just very slight and gentle in there, would work better. The bright areas are so bright we haven't got much texturing. We've got a little bit of texturing in the wall right below the windmill, which you can see there, and I think there's texture like that everywhere, but we haven't got it. The angle and the composition is good, and I like the way we've got the light and the shade on the windmill, so that works really rather well. In fact, if you'd have zoomed in and made that fill your picture, that would have been a great image. But unfortunately, it's not what you chose. You chose to give me a lot of wall and foreground, which leads me into it nicely, so that composition works. But then this thing stands out like it's, again, like it's a cutout from the background. So, you know, there are good elements here, but it hasn't quite worked for me. So again, if we move on. Steps. Simple image of some steps, you know, powerful diagonal lines going across there. Lovely texturing and detail in many places, but for me, I can see that some people would really love it, the fact you've got these really bright areas on the surface of the steps and these really dark texturing areas on the risers. But for me, I think I want to see a bit more texturing and detail on the steps themselves, rather than being blown to white, you know, and that doesn't quite, I like the idea that you've got the diagonal across the top right-hand corner. That gives me that good stop. So a composition, you led into there, you stop there, and you held on to that image. Yeah, but that's as far as it goes. I mean, I think there is a far better image of this particular setup, but it would need all those other things dulling down a bit to give you a lot more texturing. And maybe a very, very gentle vignetting around it would work as well. Something to work on. Another work in progress. Then go back to the raw file. I think you might be able to improve it dramatically. Here's another one with no particular name. And I like this woodland scene. I thought this one was done really quite well. There is a gentle vignetting, and I think it is gentle enough here to work. It holds your eye into the center. There's pleasant detail and texturing across all the grasses and all the trees in there. Generally, pictures like this, often as they are, there's nowhere to focus, but actually I find I am being drawn in through the trees, and there is one there. If you go across the empty grass scenes, there's a dark tree, it's the last one you come to, and I find that everything leads me in to look at that one tree, and it has got texture and detail on it. I would say there are a couple of excessively bright areas. If you look towards the left of the picture, the tree that seems to curve in from the lower left where the dark vignetting is, and got just to the right of that tree, mostly obscured by it, there's a very bright tree, and there's a strip there of bright white. And the next tree across, sloping slightly the other way, has also got some very bright areas. And there's one or two other little dotty bright areas in there, all of which, if they were dulled down a bit, it would make a great image. It's a skill to do that. It's a skill that I've been doing a number of woodland scenes and photographs myself, not in monochrome, but the same idea is to get that even tone. You get this dappled light, which is very hard to control because it's so bright in some areas and so dark in others. You can grab it in one shot, but it does take a fair amount of post-production to get it sorted. And I think this one is I think it's a good shot. I love it. I think it works really very, very well, but there are one or two minor problems with it. But overall, I think this is a quality shot, one that I will hold back, please. Headshot. Well, undoubtedly, the head is the focal thing here. The eye is sharp. We've got lovely detail and texturing on that, but everything else has really dropped out of focus, except for that one leg on the left-hand side. That's satisfactorily sharp. Parts of it are very sharp. And to me, in a sense, having that one part sharp on the legs there is a problem, because otherwise I'm focused on the eye, and being focused on the eye is powerful. That, if it was mine, I would just crop off there, make the image almost square and just crop off so that leg disappeared. And then you wouldn't have that problem, because I think it would may be very difficult to control depth of field to get that one out of focus like the rest of it is, but still keep the eye sharp. But I like that idea, because so often with these things you get so much more razor sharp, and I think in monochrome the way that eye is, that dominates, and that works really quite well. It's actually quite an eerie shot. It's actually quite surreal. It's actually quite otherworldly. But I say there are one or two weaknesses in that part of it. And I think there's, you got too much here. I think, if you cropped in less would be more in this case. If we move on. Spring again. Gosh, this feels like a red hot summer to me, and it feels like one of those places where you feel everything is so incredibly hot because everything's gone this red brown color. This was meant to be a sepia. I think you've oversaturated it, and you've possibly chosen slightly the wrong color. And in so doing, I think you have actually lost a lot of texturing on those petals, which should be there because they are sharp and it's not overly exposed. We've got good texturing and detail right in the center of the flowers, but some of those bright white bits are too dominant. Two flowers, usually we say get 3 in, or get 1 in, or get 5 in. But in this case, the way the two diagonally go across the picture, that composition works well. They just overlap, which means they belong together, but they don't obscure each other. That works rather well. Even that bud towards the right, that's fine. It fills in a bit of space. Depth of field is good. I like that. There's a slightly brighter at the top right, which I'd have dulled right down or even cloned right out, because that's slightly, and similarly on a leaf towards the lower left, either clone it right out or dull it right down. to make it fit with the rest of the background. But the real weakness, I think, is the lack of detail on those petals, and the choice of sepia is fine, but I think you've just oversaturated it, which is a pity, because otherwise it would be a lovely shot. Okay, shall we move on? Droplets. I assume this is some leaf which has naturally got some big holes in it, because that's what it looks like to me, that's in the rain, hopefully in the rain, or have you just sprayed it? Because the droplets are fairly similar in size, but then maybe the nature of the surface of the leaf is such that the water collecting lots of little small droplets all over it. It works well enough as an abstract image, as a shape image, and the bit I focus on, see the main vein or the main stem coming down the center, sloping from just left of center at the top to just right of center at the bottom. From there, right where it comes out of the bottom right, to the left where it starts to go out of focus, that's where the image is. An awful lot to the right adds very little to it. It's out of focus. It doesn't really add much to it. So if you'd have cropped the right-hand side off and bring it right in so that central stem is in the corner, and cropped a little bit off the left, I think that'd be a much more powerful image. It would go square, it might even go portrait. I think that'd be a much more powerful image. There's good texture, there's good lighting, there's good tonal range here, and particularly catching the droplets of water like that and getting them sharp in the center where they are. That all works, but not one of my holdbacks, I'm afraid. Cranes at sharpness, yeah. Now I think this is good. The cranes dominate the image, whether you're told so in the title or not. We've got the two cranes with their two reflections. They dominate the image. And the way the angles go there, we get this sort of chevron effect with the reflections, and that all works very well. And the reflections of the sky and the water work very well. What I felt slightly uncomfortable about was the fact that they all seem a bit off center, off to the right. And I would crop off to the left, I mean, and I crop off a bit of the right. In fact, I might crop off the right to bring it so that the cranes are all but on the right-hand side. And then there'd be a much bigger gap on the left, and that I think would be quite successful. And I did think the crop top and bottom was a little bit tight as well. But I think you've got great tonal range, you've got great separation between the cranes and the background, and in the sky and in the water. So that is all very successful. The good tone range from all but pure blacks right through almost every tone to some whites there. I think that's excellent. But I think part of the composition is what's letting it down to make it really have impact and jump out at me. Deserted Trafalgar Fair during lockdown. This is a black and white image gone to the extremes. There's a lot of black, there's a lot of white, and there's very few tones in between. There are a few. The dominant feature obviously is that standard lamp in the foreground. I think I knew exactly where you were standing to take this picture. But you said it's deserted. Now I know I can't see any people in the picture. I can see a car, certainly, if I can't see it. But the picture seems very full up. Everywhere there's something. There's bollards, there's buildings, there's fountains, there's a can of something or other. There's Nelson's column. The sky is totally and utterly featureless, but down the bottom where it is, you're saying deserted, it looks full up to me, just not with people. It doesn't actually speak deserted to me. This style of photography, this very high contrast, can be successful, and I think in some ways it could be successful, but I do think that to make it successful, you need a little bit of something in the background. Yes, it's not pure white, but it's utterly featureless, and it doesn't, I don't like that sort of graphic, I suppose is what I'm saying. And I would like to see, like you got good detail all across the column, particularly up the main part of the column, I'd like to see a little bit of similar detail on that standard lamp, particularly at the bottom, where I know there must be lots of texture and detail and carving and shape. I'd like to see a little bit of that as well in there. Then I think it might be a better image, but as it is, it didn't really work for me. Out of the Dark. I think this is, as a portrait, this is as good as it gets. Yeah, there is nothing in the picture apart from her face surrounded by a little bit of hair. The tones on the face are superb. The lighting is done to perfection. The expression, the eyes, everything is spot on perfect as far as I can see. You know, the mouth is slightly open, the lips are glistening. You know, what is there not to like? Well, maybe there's a little bit overly bright on her nose, where the light is just shining off it, you know. And I think makeup should come in there and just dab maybe a little bit of powder or something on there just to dull that down. Or maybe post-production you could do the same effect. But nevertheless, you know, I think this is an extremely powerful monochrome image that works incredibly well. And so I want to hold that one back. Yeah. This one I think is another good image. It's, you know, in the sense that technically it has been handled extremely well. We've got a fine tonal range. You've got interest in the sky in the background, and it's interest in the sky, not a distraction. The thing you see are the tiles, the roof, and the cross. That's the bits you see. That's the bits which the photographer intends you to see, I hope, and I think. And that's what I certainly see. I think all that works very, very well. The composition is good. You know, we've got the leading line in from the lower left. We've got the roof light coming in from the right. All that works very well. I do wonder if there may be a little bit too much roof and tile and not enough cross, and a bit of a crop in from the bottom to bring both sides in a bit. It's good to have that, you know, corner as it is on the lower left. We need to crop up a little bit, I think, to keep that so it has that same effect, and same crop up on the right to lose some of those cells. I think that might be an even more powerful image. The clouds, the way you've captured where the clouds are behind the cross is really very, very good. So I think, you know, technically it's superb. It doesn't quite have the aesthetic value that I have seen in some of the other images. So we'll move on. Old oak tree in a ploughed field. Well, the dominant feature here is the old oak tree. No doubting it's an oak from its shape, and no doubting it's a ploughed field across the front, across the bottom. I wonder if we could do something, get a little bit of personal style in it. This is a standard classic image of a tree in a ploughed field. And sometimes they're done in field with whatever is growing in there, the corn or whatever is growing in there. Either way, it works very well. But I think you need a little bit of personal style. The sky in the background is superb. It just fills in the background subtly and gently without in any way distracting. In fact, it makes the tree stand out. Okay. Something I've been reading very recently tells me that this oak tree has got a little chance of surviving into old age. I suspect it's only a few decades old, looking at it, and I suspect in another few decades it'll be dying off at the top, and before it's a century old, it will be dead. And that's because it's a ploughed field all around it, I'm afraid to say. And whatever you do, that little tiny air of wildness around it, totally inadequate from what I have read recently. Anyway, but as an image, I do think there may be a little bit too much foreground in there. I might have cropped a little bit more off there. And if we could have got a slightly different angle to get a bit more of a diagonal slope on there, they are sloping very slightly, but I think there's a slightly different perspective on that to see if we can get there a little bit more, you know, diagonal there. Or maybe if we crop off half the foreground, it would be, you know, then just a pleasant base. At the moment, I say there's too much of it. And I keep looking at it when I want to look at the tree. You've got great texture and detail across the tree. Yeah, I had finished it. It is time to move on. Okay, let's have a look. Geometric. Yep, a geometric shape done well. I like the geometry. I'm pretty sure this is a dome, and we've got all these lovely patterns. I'm sure I should be able to name all that particular shape and style of design, but I can't. Geodesic is as far as I'm prepared to go. But then we've got the big black area in the background. I think that was deliberate. I don't think it's been quite successful here. It doesn't really have a feel of 3D to me, even though I know it is. And I force myself to see 3D rather than it just jumping out as 3D. So I think the lighting on it needs to be slightly different to really make that 3D-ness work. Okay, should we move on? Lone photographer. Yeah. without that photographer there, or a person or something there, it wouldn't be half the image it is. I think you've done well to capture it. The depth of field is lovely. Everything from the foreground, waters and sand, right through to the hills in the background is sharp. Little bit of text, you know, the clouds lying on the horizon there, they all work very well. Above the clouds, it's a little bit featureless, and it's a little bit overly bright towards the top left-hand corner. But the sea, the sand, the photographer, the fact we got that curving wave coming in from the lower right, that all works rather well. And we got the rolling seas coming in, which seem a little bit uncomfortable because the way the rolling seas come in, it looks like they're almost rolling in off the hills in the background, which is a bit odd because I think we should have a bit of open sea. That doesn't quite work. So I think you've got a great idea. You've got the perspective right. You've got an interest point in there. Everything leads into it powerfully. But I think there are some uncomfortable aspects to this image I pointed out. So maybe you can move on. The bully. This is deceptively simple. Think, oh, there are a couple of girls having a little fight. Click, done. There's the picture. My experience is, and everyone will tell you, never work with kids, yeah, because they're the most impossibly difficult thing to photograph. In this case, I don't know how you got it, but I think this is more than just, you know, a lucky shot. It may be a lucky shot, but it has turned into a great piece of street photography. There's real drama here. There's real action here. There's real intensity and engagement here. The only thing I see in this picture are the expressions on those two girls' face. And the expressions on their faces alone tell me who is the vicious bully and who is the one in great pain being subjected to it. And if you draw back and look at the postures of their body, that carries on through there. Yeah. I don't know if they're your kids and that is a moment or what. You know, I'd hate to think that that was my daughter or granddaughter who was bullying this other girl, but nevertheless, as a piece of photography which captures something, you know, a moment, a mood, an atmosphere, live action, street photography at its best, I had no doubt that I wanted to hold that one back. Yeah, well, we've said things about very dark skies. There is a little bit of hint of whispery clouds in the background here, which are only just there. I'd like them to be a little bit better. We've got very, very strong lighting on the building and the bit of the boat we've got there. I got an idea this might be Ipswich Harbour because I'm sure I've seen the Galadriel down there, but it could be somewhere else. There's lots of places it could be. I haven't been down to it for a long time. And it gets a bit confusing, I find. The building is good and interesting in itself, and I look straight through the boat at the building, which is very square on. I can only see one edge of it. I can't see anything else. Even the bit that sticks out in the centre, which I know must stick out because there's a little bit of shadowing there, it feels flat, not 3D. And then I try to look at the boat in the foreground. It's mostly in the bottom, and it feels like this is a mask over it, and it's kind of like getting in the way of the background. It doesn't really quite work for me. And I think it's probably because even though it seems quite similar, not much, I find it overly busy. There's not enough there, and the background I think doesn't help it because it is too dark and a little bit on the featureless side. You don't want it to dominate, but we've seen others where the backgrounds have been done really quite well. I like it. I think, you know, technically it's been handled. There's lots of texture, lots of detail in there. There's no blown whites, and there are some very dark blacks and lots of tones in between, which are all very, very, very successful. Even that curve of the boat coming across the bottom, leading up to the bowsprit, and then the whatever the ropes are going up, presumably to hold the masts and the sails and things. That's all quite well done, but it gets a little bit busy altogether after that for me. So move on.
You make this the last one. We'll have a break for a couple of minutes.
Whenever you're ready. Do you break now then?
Yeah, well, we say we make this the last one. We'll have a break after this one.
Okay, right. Let's see. What's it? Oh yeah. I like this image. You know, what I liked about it was the symmetry of the mountains. Actually as mountains and the mountains as reflections. I like the undulations of the mountains, the way you've got these, you know, effectively two peaks in the background and a third peak in the foreground, which is all, you know, beautifully reflected in the waters. And not only that, but almost everywhere those rocks are in the still water, not obscuring the reflection. Just one rock towards the left, which obscures the reflection a little bit, doesn't get in the way though. And I think that's the picture, the mountains and the reflections. In a sense, despite what I just said, I find those rocks there, actually, they're very bitty and they get in the way and they almost seem like things stuck on because the water is otherwise featureless except for those. And I think totally featureless water here would work even better because this coldness, the calmness of the water, evident by the sharpness of the reflections, I think that's the beauty of this shot. And if somehow we could have got rid of all those rocks, I think that would have been a much more powerful image. It was definitely one which I was very much attracted to. We've got lovely shades and tones across there. We have got some almost blacks there and almost whites there, but good tonal detail everywhere. It is a successful image. It all but made the cut, or the final cut, but not quite. But yeah, likewise, I heard the little laugh there. I found this a humorous picture, and there is no doubt about the subject. The subject jumps out at you from the picture, and we've got that old log or trunk that he's sitting on, which leads you nicely into the picture. And I think that's all great. Found some of the background a little bit, highly contrasted. There's very dark trees and very bright areas. They don't distract, because I think the subject is powerful enough on its own. But I found this, not it's more of a record shot, or maybe it's part of a series of pictures of activities going on, a fag break, or what went on before, what went on afterwards. And I'd like to see images of that. So it might work better as a set rather than individual, but technically it's been well handled. This is very high contrast, very high key. I wondered if possibly this was an infrared image. I'm not sure. Infrared does lend itself to black and white and can be, when handled correctly, very powerful way of doing black and whites. But what I found about this, I liked the building and the reflections in the water, and I liked the bits of whispery clouds in there. That all worked very well. And the fact the sky then comes bright as it comes down onto the horizon. But we've got some extremely bright white, almost featureless areas in what I assume are rushes and grasses around the sides, particularly on the right, and in the center coming across, the other side of the water from where we're taken. Positioning, composition works well, but that's about as far as it goes, I'm afraid. Yeah, beach shot. We've got everything's right here, isn't it? We've got all the beach shots. We've got the, good textures and details in the foreground. Got interesting sky. I didn't think that the colorations here were successful. It's not overdone like one we saw. It's a slight sepia effect, but it's not overdone like the one we had before. Less so than that, but it doesn't seem quite right to me. And it does feel a bit like those huts are all straight the way across the center of the picture. A diagonal effect on them somehow would be better, I think. But I like the fact we've got the blowing grass, we've got life and motion there, but you tell me the subject is the huts, and the huts are undoubtedly the subject, but I find them a bit flat across the center. River reflection. Right, well, again, a sepia that I think has been a bit overdone. It's a bit too red for my liking, but it is monochrome. There's no doubt about that. I think the slight noisiness in the background is fine. The textures in the sky and the noise all work well. The dominant feature is the building and its reflection in the water. That works well, but we've got some very bright white areas just to the left of the building, which are reflections of the sky, but the sky we can see is nothing like as bright as that. I think the reflections in the water should mirror and mimic what you've got in the sky in your picture. So that doesn't quite work for me. But otherwise, it's a well done image. You've done well, but there are some, in my opinion, some significant weaknesses. Vapor does remind me in some ways of the fag break, and not simply because it's smoke involved, but the nature that a single person standing in the image there, and I think that works well as a piece of street photography. That's done well. The lighting is powerful directly across from the coming in from the left. That works well. And the way the vapor is coming out of his mouth, and we can see it clearly separated from the quite light stonework behind. That all works rather well. I think there's probably too much area on the right. I think this is a tool as a vertical letterbox might be better. So you need to crop off the right, I think. But I think it's done well. I think it's a good record shot. I think it's more than just a record shot. It is a good piece of street photography, but it's not one I want to hold back tonight. A railway station somewhere in the Far East, one assumes. I don't know the place. All I can see is a number 12 and a lady walking down there in a very short skirt. And the train, there's this powerful leading diagonal. The fact that this main guy, the porter, the station master, whatever he is, standing there looking at me, I find, you've got engagement in the photographer and the subject, but I'd like that subject looking into the picture, to draw me into that picture. And then I'd need something a little bit more in focus. So the lady I mentioned earlier on, walking to us, maybe she was a little bit more in focus would work. It works well. There's good tonal ranges. You've handled that very well, but I don't think it quite has the impact as a composition that makes it work for me. So move on. Okay. Warehouses in Gloucester Dock. So we had a completely different picture of Gloucester. This one I do seem to recognise. This seems a bit more familiar to me, with the barges in front of the warehouses and the slightly more modern boat towards the right. And I like the reflections in the water. We have got some very bright areas in the reflections and on the buildings, but generally speaking, they all work rather well. I'd like to see those bright areas a little bit dulled down, so it's just a little bit more texturing in the water where those reflections, those bright areas are. It's a difficult subject to do, and maybe you were there just a little bit too late. And so the lights are too bright compared to the natural light. It's a fine tune to get that just right. There are moments when the natural light and the lights, the artificial lights have about the same luminosity, and then these pictures can be incredibly successful. And given that the artificial lights are a bit overly bright, that means it probably doesn't work so well. But there's good texture, there's good detail, there's good tonal ranges elsewhere throughout the picture. Okay. Yeah, I like this one. I thought this was really very, very good. Now, I don't know if it's lucky or you very skillfully set this up, but every single post in that image is separated from every other post in that image. And that works well. They stand up from the beach, through the sea, across the horizon, into the sky, and they fill the picture. The sky in the background has some detail in it. Doesn't matter, as long as it's not just plain white or plain black. This works very well. There's superb separation between them. We've got the foreground rock of interest in there as well. That works quite well. If it was mine, I'd like to see that a slightly different position with that rock. If that rock had been just a little bit to the right, that would be even better. But I guess if you moved position so that is to the right, you probably couldn't get the separation on all the poles. I think this is a lovely image. We've got good tonal ranges across there, good texture and detail in all the posts, good lighting on them all, and I think that's one I want to hold back. Ivy. Yeah, it's another fine portrait. It's a little on the high key side, which is, it's a fine technique. You've handled it well, although high key, therefore bright on the face and the arm. There is texture and detail in there. Good expression on her face, good pose. I'm a little bit uncomfortable about the way the arms cross in the middle, and we've got this line across the middle, which almost separates the top half of the lady in her face from things from waist, hips downwards, and the legs. They almost seem like they're two separate parts of the picture. And I wonder if you actually have got two pictures there. Crop it so that her left arm, the higher arm in the picture, is all cut out, and we've got the hand holding the hat and her legs in. Or if you crop it the other way around, so you've only got the upper hand, so the arm with all the tattoos on it has gone, and we just got the top. And I think either one of those could be very, very successful and work. The background is fine, it's there, there's detail, but it's nothing to distract. Can't be sure what it is, woodwork of some sort, but that all works fine. She's what stands out. Eyes don't quite sparkle enough for me, but the expression and the mood and the attitude is all, very well done. Didn't make the cut for me, I'm afraid. back to where she belongs. Yeah, I can see this is probably it's a picture of a ship's bell, presumably of some sort, or no, maybe it's not a ship's bell, maybe it's another sort of bell. And it's a big bell hanging on chains. Something about the Second World War, because you've got the 39 to 45 on it. There's a lot of other writing in the background, in memoriam of H. Charles Jordan, and something about this is the something or other. Yeah, those words in the background are sharply in focus, and they distract from the subject matter, which is the bell. And I think that the bell, you've lost the very bottom of it. You're not zooming in on detail. You seem to have the whole bell in there. The top, you've got all support mechanisms of the bell, just the chains holding it go out. I think you need the same at the bottom, get it all in there. But you need a much shallower depth of field, so those things in the background don't distract. But you've got good tonal range, you've got good texturing, and that all works successfully, but not one for the cut. Up the escalator. Right, well, the dominant part of the picture appears to be the steps from the, well, basically right the way across the bottom, coming up and going out towards the right. The escalator bit seems to be hidden behind some glass, and we do have a shadowy figure on the extreme left, near lower down, appears to be standing on the escalator, possibly going up. Blur through motion, I think, but then it would be quite dull here, and we would expect there to be a little bit of motion blur there. It's quite a busy image, and we've got this one pole just right of centre, which goes from top to bottom, which does have the effect of cutting the picture in half. But you've got a full range of tones there, from all but black to all but white, that work there. And you've got some powerful diagonals going across there, but the overall effect of all that is it ends up being a little bit busy for me. Crack landscape, reminiscent of a couple of other ones where we've had footpaths leading straight into the picture. They were both in trees before. And you've got good texture, good detail. We've got a little bit of motion in the barley, I think this is. And the footpath leads me right in, but I follow it down, and I get to the end, and there isn't anything. I'm looking for something. You can see where the path starts to suddenly get that much narrower. I really want something in there. A hare would be great, or some other such small animal, rodent of some sort, in there, running around doing something would be great. If he's there, he's too small, I can't see it. I need a little bit bigger so I can see it. I love the lighting on that cracked earth in the lower right-hand part of the picture. That's all superb. But there's that bit, and
what's going on? Right,
the cracked earth. All I was going to say, there's that dark, which is really lovely. But again, the lightness, it's very bright on the corners towards the upper left, which is a little bit of a worry. I think you got a good image there. I think it just needs a little bit more post-production just to sort out the tones, and maybe something to add interest in there, which you could possibly also add post-production.
Right, now properly.
Grant's gazelle. I suspect, but I don't know, that this may well be taken in a zoo. I can't tell. There's nothing in the background to tell me it's that. Grant's gazelles are very common in zoos. We've got grassy land that looks quite wild, which makes me think maybe not in a zoo, but I don't know. But you've vignetted it around with a bright white vignette. I'm not sure what that adds to the image, if anything. The animal himself, we've got good tonal range there, we've got good detail, we've got good texturing there. The pose is good, the subject's good, the head is separated from the body, but the eye is very dull. And, I didn't like the vignetting. I don't think that really adds anything to it. Dusk on the pier head. This is a classic shot, a long shutter speed, because we can tell by the sky and the water that it is a long shutter speed. And it's a classic shot looking down the pier into the water. We have got something at the end, a little gull. It doesn't really stand out. We don't get led into it. And I think an image like this, you need a very wide angle lens to actually make the pier disappear much more sharply into the image. I don't know what angle, how wide your lens was, but wider than this. Okay, so it really disappears much more sharply in than this does. And it's wide angle lens you need to do it, not taking it up high. In fact, with a wider angle lens and coming lower would be even more powerful. Common seal. Well, I'm sure it is a common seal. I think the treatment on this one is really very good. I like the colorations. I think this time that sepia toning has worked really well and probably suits the seal in the center there. The seal, good pose, good lighting, detail in the eye. There was a little bit of glow and glisten in the eye. That's all very good. And it's sitting there on the, well, whatever it is in the water, on the weeds or whatever that is, the seaweed there. That all works rather well. Depth of field is excellent. Everything in the background is out of focus. I was a little bit distracted by the sparkles in the water. That was a bit of a problem for me. And I think if that was mine, I'd have to clone some of them out and then dull some of the others down. But I like the way the seal stands out, and I like the where it is there. Possibly a slight crop there to make him bigger in the image would have helped as well. But good image, didn't quite make the cut, I'm afraid. A bit like the one we saw just now a couple of times ago with the cracked earth in the barley field. But this time we got this lovely S shape leading around the picture. And again, we've got the grasses leading around, the hedge leading around. We've got good detail in the grass. And again, I'm led into the picture with the S. It's always a successful shape, but I'm looking somewhere for something. And all I do is I lead in the grasses, go around the corner and follow the dark hedge right the way down and end. And it doesn't take me, there's nothing to bring me back apart from going along the same line again. I like the texture and I like the detail. The sky is a bit featureless, so maybe if you crop more of that off, you need to keep all the tops of the trees in, I think, but you come right down to the tops of the trees, the birch top of the image, that might be a bit better. Something else in there to help. Don't know what this is. The number doesn't help me very much. This looks like it's looking out over a bridge or dockland or waterway or something or other. Looks like we're inside a waiting room of something or other. Maybe it's a harbour waiting room to get onto a boat. Can't tell. Very, very dark, very much in silhouette. We can see the couple on the left and we can see the couple in the centre. And there is some detail there and some light there, but overall, I found there was nothing that really held my attention. The shapes are interesting, but not interesting enough to hold me. And the background is very bright outside, as you would expect, but it doesn't make for a successful image. What is good is the fact that the main two characters just right of centre, they are framed by the white areas behind them, or the very bright areas behind them. And the guy on the left in particular, we've got good light and texture on his face and glasses. That works really very well. But otherwise, I didn't find this image was powerful enough to want me to hold it back. I like the graphic on this. I like the shapes and the patterns and the textures and the fact that it is a graphic image in many, many ways. And we have got, I think, 5 people there moving up and down the staircase as we go. But they all seem to be, almost like they're laughing and like, oh, well, I know I'm being photographed. I know I should be happy. And I'm going to really try hard for that, particularly the gentleman second in from the left. He looks like, well, I know you're fine. I'm not going to look at you, but I'm very much aware. That's what I feel about it. And the lady coming up the stairs in that couple looking at him, again, they feel a bit posed. Now, they may not be, but that's the effect that ends up coming up with on me. The big white triangular area, which is presumably part of the side of the staircase, the big white area, totally featureless. That one I'm worried about. Less so about the areas in the top and the right, but that one across the centre there, it needs a little bit of feature in it, I think, something there. And if it is that pure and plain and featureless, then it probably wasn't the right place to take the image, I'm afraid. Yeah. Great image, great texturing, great detail, great composition, nice sky, pleasant reflections in the water, nice backlighting through the trees and the reeds on the lower right. But I look around him as if I find all these lovely things, but I'm still looking for something to focus on. I focus a little bit on the reflections of the reeds across the water. That works quite well. I focus a little bit on the lily pads in the foreground. That works quite well. But nothing really. We need something in the water. A swan coming into land would have been beautiful, but something in there. Could be a boat, could be a bird, could be a fish jumping out, whatever. But it's well done technically. It's well handled, but something missing. Again, the title doesn't tell me anything about what this is, other than it's presumably a huge sculpture of some sort in a courtyard somewhere or another with a strange looking floor. it has a feeling of being, you know, the perspective is odd. The floor seems like it's tipping away down out to the lower left, whereas the trees are vertical, and the building looks as though it's slightly converging verticals. That's what you might expect from a slightly lower angle. I like the fact you framed the sculpture between the trees. That works rather well. But if you look where the sculpture is, up to where the top of the building is, and the trees just to its left and right, and then where the trees on the right, where they pop through the floor, I'd crop it off there and just have those sets of trees left and right of the image, the top of the building cropped out so that it looked like building in the background and far less of the foreground. I think that'd be a much more powerful image. You've got good texture, you've got good detail, you've got good lighting, and you have done something to make this a picture of somebody else's artwork, but a picture which you have put something of yourself into by the particular position and, you know, way you frame the picture up. That was successful, but not quite successful to hold back for me. What a sweet little dog waiting for his dinner. Yeah, and it is cute little dog, almost looking at you, but not quite. I think he's looking over my shoulder at somebody else. Not sure about the sepia toning, but if that's what you like, that's what you like. But really, if this is your dog, you're going to love it and you're going to want to put it in your family album. But it's not a picture for a competition. It's just not doing enough for me. I don't mind the crop. I think that works well. Okay, we can move on. Misty marshes. Well, yep, it's definitely marsh in, you know, in the mist. You can see the background there, which is disappearing into the mist, and you feel the water is there, even though you can't actually see it because of all the low-lying mist on it. And we've got lots of verticals of all the rushes in the foreground, but they're much of a muchness. It repeats itself in 2 and 3 and 4 sections as we go across. I know they're all different, but there's nothing there to actually hold my image and my attention. I just feel you've seen it, you've taken it, and that's it. It needs something more than that. Okay, we had another lake scene a few pictures ago, and this is, you know, we've had a couple there with buildings and reflections in the water before. And, you know, great tones, great reflections, you know, good detail throughout the trees and all that. And the slower shutter speed to get this sort of slightly milky effect in the reflections in the water. All that works well enough, but that's as far as it goes. You know, I might be inclined to crop a lot of that water off, maybe lose as much as half of it. Then I think that it might be a slightly more powerful image. In fact, you could actually lose a lot of the left and move that left corner up. So you've lost half the water as well, but keeping the same aspect ratio, which means that those reeds would then need to be dialed right down so they don't become too bright as they would be. At the moment, they're framed nicely, so that works. But I think there's an image here that just needs one more thing in it, or a tighter crop to make something dominate. Crossover. Now, despite what I said about a lot of the others, I find this one absolutely fabulously intriguing. We've got the geometric patterns that work incredibly well. We've got this lovely shape, this big chevron on the left, which is perfectly matched against the chevron of these buildings on the right. Everything leading into the picture. There is a solitary figure down there, which I find actually really a very powerful figure. If that figure had just been just slightly to the, as we look at it, to the left, to the right of the person, moved one step to the right, they were just framed entirely by the perfect. I love all the detail in the buildings at the background. The depth of field, having everything sharp from back to front, works really well. I love the geometry of this. I love the lighting of this. I love the overall composition of this. And I love the feel for the place. As a cityscape, an evening cityscape, this is, you know, as good as it gets, I feel. So I want to hold that one back. Okay, so this has a lot to do with a number of the others. There's a pleasant sky here with texturing. There's nice foreground. The windmill stands out well enough from the background. The trees stand out clearly from the background. We've got good tonal ranges there. The problem I find is that it's the way we've got the angle on that windmill. The sails are a bit too square on. I think I wanted to see them a bit more. So you need to move to your left So you'll be looking a bit more on the front of those, and then they'd be better. And one of the cells, the one nearest to us on the lower part, is very bright. It's almost blown out. And unfortunately, because that's the key point on them, it's on the right, it's on the thirds there, it's where you look, and it's bright and it's blown out, and that is a distraction. But again, yeah, no, I'd finished. Yeah. Rooftop, I love this. I love the geometry of this. I think this is perfect. There is not a lot of detail in here, but where there is detail on the chairs and the tables and the exact position, wow, that is really superb. To be absolutely perfect, where that table, the further table, the one nearest to the right, overlaps the edge of the top where it's on. If we just got that separation, that would be great. The way the first table and the second table just overlap the legs of the chest, perfect. And the fact we've got something in the back, it looks like water in the back. It's subtle, it's toned, it's textured, it's not plain black. And that works really well. I love the shapes, I love the composition, and I love the high keyness of it, which is not blown out and lacking detail. That's another one I want to hold back. I think that you're trying to be topical with this image by having this person, is it a late nurse, a gent maybe, I don't know, looking out of the window there. It's really difficult to tell when people have got a mask. It is a gent, yeah, I'm convinced it's a gentleman now, with his mask on, and you're being topical with that. And I think you've got a potentially brilliant image here if that mask was not there. It isn't now topical, but I think the portrait here is great. Look at the skin tones on his forehead, on his hand. Look at the way the lighting plays through his hair and across his top. The overall composition of the hand there, that works brilliantly well for me. Yeah, and I would have cropped it off the right there. You see where the window is and the bright whites. Where it goes dull, it goes much darker. I crop it to there, so we had that darkness down the right-hand side, and then it went a bit brighter. I think that would make a superb image, again, without the mask. I suggest go back and do it again and take the mask off this time. The tree stands out brilliantly well at the top and brilliantly well at the bottom with the shadows on the grass, but in the middle, it's a real mush mix-up. Nothing separates from anything, really. It's very, very busy, very, very confusing. I think you've got good tonal range on there. I like the fact you've done it from a slightly lower perspective. I haven't got too much in the foreground, but it is too dark and too bright and too busy in the middle. I like the sky, that's fine. In this case, because the sky is barely there, it's just there so you can get the whole of the shape of the curving shape of the top of the tree. That doesn't bother me that it's featureless in this case. Yeah, I think you need to get it so the tree is more separated from the background. And it's probably too close to do it with depth of field. So I don't know quite how you do it. Maybe it's just the wrong tree to photograph. Yeah, I like this one. I think it's good. I think it's done well. I think it's got good shapes and good formances to it. It is I think, a very good record shot. We've got good tonal ranges, good textures, good detail, lots and lots of mountains. And I think maybe that's the weakness. You've got too much of it. We've got nice details in the lower left where you've got the curving suits, the darker areas. We've got several mountains coming up and down. But towards the right, I'm not sure where the mountains end and where the clouds begin. Particularly, they are disappearing into the sky, but there's some very odd patterns of sky there, which I find rather confusing. I think the bits on the left are much, much better. And if you cropped it in half and lost everything in the right half, I think that might be a much more powerful image. Lone trees are attractive. There's nothing to dislike about the technical quality of, the tonal ranges, the detail in the sky, the detail in the in the mountains and the hills and the foreground as well. And the tree, you've got it right. It's all nicely framed by the sky, so it all stands out well. Even when it's against the hills and the main trunk, that all works. We've got all detail in there. So but I think this is one which, as a single image, doesn't have quite the impact it might have if it was one of a series of varying lone trees and bushes and shrubs, all in this slightly wilder, inhospitable environment. So I think, you know, you've got one great image, now go and do 4 or 5 more and put them together as a panel, and you'll have hugely powerful images. Yeah, another well composed, well seen, great lighting, great textures. You know, focal point is the chair. Everything leads me up to that chair, which the title tells me to do so. But that's as far as it goes. It then loses into, it's got much impact initially, but it doesn't have holding power for my attention. It needs something. How about a ghostly figure on the chair? How about something else in there? I don't know what, or less maybe. I'm not sure, but I don't think there's enough there to have real impact. A figure rather than a chair, a ghost on the chair, I think might be the difference. Milky slow shots. The lower part of the picture with the milky slow shots and the sharp, well, pebbles, rocks, which are shown through, that works really well. The rocks on the left towards the top work really well, but then we got this misty, rough sea in the middle right, and I don't think that quite works. It's too different. We've got the misty flow of the sea over the sand and rocks in the lower part, particularly to the left, but then we go up to the right, and now we've got a very different type of sea. It's therefore becomes too busy, too many different things going on. I think you need to focus on one part as they're not quite so much, and then you get a great shot. You've clearly got the techniques to do this. You can handle the black and whites really well, and you've done so, but it's the composition and the range of different subject matters in there in terms of the texture of the sea, which don't work quite for me. Yeah, the bee, and the bee is what stands out here. It's quite small in the image, but it stands out here. Flowers are bright, but nevertheless, the bee stands out. We've got good detail on the bee. I think the weakness is the fact that, again, it is a black background. There is nothing there. I like a depth of things going out of focus, but I like something there. And there really is nothing there, except for some little lightness in the lower left, which I don't think actually that makes it worse, not better. If we had more little textury bits in the background that like way out of focus leaves a dappled light in it, that might be the improvement in this one. But you got the flowers done well. You got the, you know, the bee flying into one, that's done well. The motion on the wings, that's excellent. Sharp where it should be, that's all very good. Yeah, great idea. 2 boats going out to sea. You can clearly see their titles. You've got interesting sky, interesting foreground, textures in the water, good, you know, and the fact the boats are in the water and they cut across the horizon into the sky, both of them, that works well. They're moving. I think I'd like a little bit more space on the left, so they are clearly moving out into it, because that boat, the further away boat, seems as though it's, you know, hasn't really got enough space to move into. But it works well enough. It's a, you know, and the vertical or letterbox format does work well in this one, but not quite good enough for the cut, I don't think. Another old boat, and yeah, I find this a bit too contrasty, to be quite honest. The foreground and the rocks on the water, that's fine, but then the boat itself, the old skeleton of a boat there, I find that very, very, very contrasty, too contrasty rather than textury. And then it gets repeated on all the dead bits of tree in the background. It gets very, very busy. The boat is clearly the main subject, but where it's broken up towards the prow of the boat, and where you see in the foreground, the background through it, it gets all very busy. We don't have that separation. It doesn't really jump out at me. And that's probably because you've done it in very harsh midday lighting, which is not the best time to do an image like this, particularly in monochrome. But the composition is fine, you know, and you have got tonal range there, but it's just this very, and it, you know, it may not be the right boat to do because of that very busy background. You can't do anything about that. The fallen birch. Again, I say I look at images before I look at titles, and I thought the subject matter here was that little building in the background reflected in the water, because that's highlighted, that stands out. It's darker around it. The vignetting here is subtle, but it works. Okay, but then I see the tree in the foreground. Now you tell me that's the subject matter, and it's not for me. It's foreground interest, but it's not the subject matter. That is my lead-in line to the building, and that's what I see there. And if it was mine, I probably would have just cropped that out and focused more on the building. Lunch break. Yeah, it's a great record shot of a couple having their lunch. Presumably these are, oh, and there's a little child there. I missed the little child just now. And they're all having lunch, fish and chips out of the now polystyrene cards. I'd like to say out of a newspaper. And it looks like they're on their boat somewhere or another, or sitting on the harbour dockside somewhere or another. You know, it's a great little record shot. Putting it into monochrome does add atmosphere and feeling to it. We have got a bit of a halo around the guy's head and neck, which is a shame. But it's more a quality image for the album than it is a competition shot. Yeah. Well, as with many others, you know, you've got all the right elements, you know, some interest in the sky, the cliffs and the stacks and so on. You're telling me the stacks of the image, they don't jump out from the background. And I'd have zoomed right in on those stacks with a narrow enough depth of field so the stacks, which are darker, really stood out from the background, and the background was dropping out of focus. That's what you're telling me is the subject. Or on the right, where you've got the stack which actually attached to the cliff still, and it's a little bit of water through. Zoom right in on that one. I don't have any sky at all, only have a little bit of water, and chop it off, you know, so the top of the cliffs are not there. There are your two images there. I think you've got vastly too much water in this. But you've got good tonal ranges, you've got good texture, you've got good detail. I like the composition with a little bit of grass in the foreground and everything else. But I'm not sure what to look at here. You haven't really given me a clear focal point in the image which attracts me. This is brilliant. I love this image. It's a composite, clearly, but I think it's done superbly well. Every element of it, the station master with his hat, he's done well. Good tones on his face, good details everywhere in the light and dark areas there. The boat, the steam engine, the 318, the 31806, that's good. We've got details there. We've got a vignetting around it which holds it all in. We've got the wheels at the top in the background, but that kind of like, it feels right to me. I think this is aesthetically a very pleasing picture, and that expression on the station master's face, I like that. It's a smile of happiness and pride in what he's doing, the fact he's keeping nostalgia alive and you know, keeping the trains going. But you know it's nostalgia and it's not an old picture because those glasses look incredibly modern. Fine, I don't mind that. I think this works very, very well. So I'll hold that one back, please. Yeah, I love this face. And I thought I was really engaged with her face and the high keyness of the picture. And there's quite good detail in the hair, but given the high key face, I'm not fussed about the fact that parts of the hair are a little bit on the dark side. There is good detail in the hair framing around her face. The one thing that bothered me was the fact that we've got this bikini top. And I thought for an image like this, you just want skin and no clothes at all. Okay. And I'm sure if she's your model, that she would have been quite happy to just drop that top far enough so it wouldn't be in the picture. I'm not saying she should unclothe herself, but just enough so the strap's not there. You could have cropped in slightly, so you just dropped the straps off and you cropped in where the strap joins, you know, that would have been a brilliant image, I think. But as it stands, I find that really, really very, very distracting. It may be the fact that it's very dark with stripes on it that's the problem. And maybe if she wore a much lighter colour, something nearer to flesh tone, it would have been more successful. But I did find that I think you've done really well to capture this, and it is a good, and it certainly is a monochrome image. So well done for that, but not quite the cut, I'm afraid. And this, I think, is all but our last image. The bull coming straight at us. His AR5 number on him is whatever number on him, straight at us. He stands out for the image. Depth of field is excellent. Lighting is very strong on this one, so you've got a high contrast between one side of him and the other side, but you've held it well. It looks as though it should be menacing, but he's chewing grass. So, you know, you think he's walking straight to you, but he's not really menacing. He's not charging at you. I don't feel the least little bit threatened. The horns, well, they don't threaten me either. But yeah, it's a well captured image, but it's not stunning. It's not outstanding.
Last one.
Awesome. Yeah, I like the style of this image. I like the feel about it. The fact that there's a different style to it. The way it's, you know, like almost like a pen and ink drawing with all the trees. I like the two birds in the top. You know, it almost feels like a constable composition, but a modern day constable, because look at the people walking on the footpath or on the towpath. They're all definitely in, you know, 21st century or late 20th century clothing. And the figure paddling away in the water, that to me is 21st century. And I like the way it all works around. We've got a hole on the right with the bushes. We follow the guy up, see the house, capture the footpath, and come right back down it to those couples, you know, on the right hand side. That works all rather well. We even got a little duck or something floating in the water down the bottom right as well. That all works. So I think overall it is, you know, it's good. We've got a good tonal range. Highlights and blacks there, they all work very well. Good texture, good detail. But I did feel uncomfortable. The rest of it works really well, but actually the guy on the paddle doesn't actually fit the rest of the image. He's not quite right for it. If he'd been in a canoe, that might have been better. But standing up on that paddleboard doesn't quite work. That's the weakness, I think.
That's it. Right, you have got 9 held back.
That's spot on. Can you bring them up in the order I'd like you to?
I can give them a go.
Right. Let me see. Not that one first. The one I'd like first. It doesn't have it. It's one. It was one that was called P806. It's the one of the trees in the woodlands. Not the path, but the other one.
P806 is not here. Oh, yes, it is. Sorry, my mistake. That one.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, right. Definitely that one. Given what the time's doing, I'm just going to very quickly, I've said all I want to say about the picture. That is one of my commendeds.
No, that one. Hang on a second. Right.
Okay, if we can bring back the Port of Willunga, the post on the beach.
Right. Which one, sorry?
Port of Willunga, the post on the beach.
Sorry, can you give me the title again?
The Old Port Willunga.
Oh, right, yes, that one.
That one, yeah, absolutely. That's another commended.
No, we'll only do one at a time.
Yeah, and
Get this one a second. I'll have to write this one down. The scoring's gone wrong. Right, that's
Right,
highly commended, you say? That's commended.
Yeah, the first two were commended, Jeff. That was Warren's P something or other.
Yeah, that's all right.
Can you bring up the Old Lion?
Hang on a second. The Old Lion.
Okay, the Lion, yeah.
Yeah.
That one, yeah, absolutely. That's my third commended.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
If you can, yeah, if you can bring up my, let's see, which one we're going to go for. The Crossrail view, the cityscape. That one, yep, that's a highly commended.
Right.
The Station Master. Yep, that's another highly commended.
Yep.
And the Iris.
That one, yep.
Yep.
No, what's that? That's a
highly commended as well.
Yep.
That should mean we got 3 left.
Yep.
In third place, if we can bring up the portrait called Out of the Dark.
Boom, 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 boom. Yep.
Looking at, that's it, that one. Yep, that's my third place.
Yep.
And if we can bring up the rooftop dining, the geometric table and chairs thing, that's my second place. Which therefore leaves the bully in first place. I don't know why I was bullied into making that the first place, but it was an overpowering image, and it did. It bullied me. It told me this has got to be first.
Right, now let's show results, and then if I do that. Right, it didn't record the other highly commended and commended. So
they were commended were Crossrail View by me, Station Master.
That was highly commended.
That's a highly commended for Station Master by Paul Simpkin.
Yeah.
Iris, highly commended by Marie King. And then the commendeds were Warren's P something or other, P number. Wollonga, is it Wollonga Beach? I can't see it.
That was Maurice King.
Maurice King, was it?
Yeah.
And then the Old Lion,
John Thompson
by JT. And that's all the commended.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, it says there actually you've got there that the picture by the no-name picture by Warren Martin as second highly commended. That was only commended.
Yeah.
It's just the way the scoring works. That for some reason it calls it a second highly commended. I'll have to look into that. But
it's a software, right? Yeah.
A query of the free projection software.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to stop sharing the screen, Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jeff. It's having been the guy doing the software for a couple of competitions as well. You have my intense sympathy. I honestly don't understand who invented film free projection, but they clearly have never done the job. That's all I can. Because
I'm inclined to agree. I'm competition secretary at my club, and I find we've used 3 different pieces of software, and none of them are intuitive.
Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking half the time. They're sort of like, I did it last time, and I discovered that instead of holding back everything, I'd actually thrown away the things we wanted to hold back. Had to work it in reverse and frantically collect it out.
Yeah, it's because the function reverses when you do from the initial hold back. Then when you go through those hold back ones, the command actually reverses to get rid of them.
Because that makes sense.
It does, doesn't it? Yes.
Right. Okay.
It does if you do it enough.
Yeah, well, anything does, doesn't it? Right, well, so thank you very much, Andy, for going through quite a lot of images. I think probably next time we'll cut it down to below 88 images, because that was a lot of work for one night.
I judge at a lot of clubs, and you are up the top end in terms of numbers.
Yeah.
There is one club where I never get away with less than 100. And that's unbelievable. That's ridiculous. You know, you got about sort of 45 seconds a picture to get.
Yeah, and to be honest, you would get. I think the difference is normally that with a lot of judges we'll get 2 minutes per image, but that's an image and a half of waffle, and then 20 seconds of analysis. Whereas we were getting hardcore analysis of every image. You gave them a thorough going over and went through and gave a very good critique of each image, saying what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it, what could be improved, what couldn't be improved in a really constructive way, which I thought hopefully most people will find really helpful on their images, and give pointers as to, at least if you hated the image, we know why you didn't like it. I think it's always a bit of a mystery to me, where I've sat in clubs and the judge says, you know, it's excellent, and then gives it a really low mark, and you think, well, what was that about? Well, at least you know you went through all 88 images, and all 88 images got your full attention. So thank you very much for that. Can we give Andy our thanks in the usual way, please, people?